What's going on, my lovelies? It's Kyle here. So I want to talk and primarily direct this video towards the empaths out there. Those of you who are highly empathic, sensitive, and tune into others very readily. So this video is primarily for you, but also helpful for others. I want to talk about something very important. Something, an aspect and a dynamic that plays into just about every single relationship. And it's called enmeshment. And why it's so important is because this topic and this phenomenon in regards to empaths usually end up pulling the short end of the stick in enmeshed relationships. Now, why is that? And first, what is enmeshment? So I pulled up an article on Psych Central. I'm going to briefly gloss over it. I'm going to put the link in the description if you want to follow along or if you just want to go into detail later on. But from their definition, I'm going to expand on this because I think enmeshment, it applies to more aspects of relationships instead of this broad brush. So they say if you're in a relationship where you always put the other person's needs first, you might be in an enmeshed relationship. Okay, so essentially an enmeshed relationship, from what they are saying, is that you view yourself as a we. You view yourself as being responsible for the other person's emotional regulation. You view yourself as a unit instead of two individuals that are connecting. You're enmeshed. You are attached in an unhealthy manner. And not only is there this dynamic of that applies to empaths, where if you're highly empathic, you are likely going to put your needs to the wayside to benefit and to put your other or your partner's needs first. So it's very unhealthy. You don't have healthy boundaries. You don't assert your needs because you don't, in many cases, want to experience the negative emotions that you will elicit from your partner or from that other person in that relationship. Because you're highly empathic, because you feel into people, because you pick up on other people's emotions and perhaps thought patterns or energies, you want to minimize the bad overall. So you end up in this position where you keep letting go of your needs, keep letting go of your needs, keep letting go of your needs until you have no identity in the relationship. Because until you might lose completely track of yourself. You might lose yourself in the relationship, and that's not healthy. And so empaths, it's so vital for you out there to begin unenmeshing yourself from these relationships that are heavily lopsided. Okay? And in order to put up those boundaries and assert yourself, you first have to pull away. You have to unenmesh. You have to unattach, detach healthily. You have to become an individual. And then once you're an individual and you find out what you want, what you need, what you desire in a relationship, you get to find out if you're deeply compatible with that person. So all the discomfort, all the not so good feelings that you might have to go through, perhaps fights, it's not enjoyable, but it's important to remember this. In the long term, this is what's healthiest for both parties. Now, why is that? Because when you unenmesh yourself and you find out who you are, what you desire, what you want, you get to find out, are we deeply compatible? Do we connect in a healthy manner? And if we find out what we both want, where does it align? And does it align enough to make this relationship work? Does it align enough to keep that connection going? And you also might find out, like, okay, I don't want them to be super close to my life, but they can be in my life a little bit. So you get to renegotiate and reorient yourself in this particular relationship that is healthiest in the long term. So remember that. And I want to just touch on this. So they say that enmeshed relationships is one party benefits, the other party loses track of themselves and puts their needs to the wayside. Not always the case. You might have two parties that are highly empathic, two parties that are not very empathic, but they feel in certain aspects of that relationship, they are enmeshed and they are more heavily enmeshed. So you might have lack of boundaries, healthy individuation in that relationship in certain parts. So that could be in regards to your hobbies. We always do this together. We always eat this meal together. We always hang out with our friends together. Wherever it plays out, or, we always, when I'm feeling bad and I'm down or I need help, you have to be showing up to me all the time whenever I need it. And in regards to this particular example, you need to be aware of that pattern. And it's also important for us to call ourselves out where we are unhealthily entitled to the other person trying to help us. We see them as an extension of ourselves to regulate us or to do what we want them to do. So it's not going to be just cut and dry, painted with a broad brush that one party sacrifices and the other party gains. Not always the case. It's going to be, especially if you're in more balanced relationships, there's going to be more nuance. And it might be, you might be enmeshed in different parts of your relationship. So it's good to dive into where you might be enmeshed unhealthily and how to unenmesh yourself and put up those healthy boundaries and find out what works for you. And so just want to make that clear. It's not just cut and dry where one party puts their needs to the wayside and the other party, their needs are heavily prioritized all the time. Not always the case. Okay. But I think what they say is that this is a very healthy balance, right? When they say in a highly cohesive family, members behave warmly and supportively towards one another while also encouraging individual independence and decision making. So you have that first, members behave warmly and supportively. You have that connection. They like to pick each other up. They like to help and support when the other person needs it, while at the same time encouraging that individuation, while encouraging you to be your own person. So your two me's coming together and connecting instead of a we. So that is the healthy balance right there. Connection, not attachment, not enmeshment. And let's see. And this isn't just with individuals. You can have an enmeshed group where there's a group think, a group mentality, and you can't deviate from the group norms. Not healthy. Once again, it should be, if you're part of a group, a bunch of me's connecting. Even though you might not connect on the right ways or perfect all the time, have that individuation and connect where you can connect. And if it's not working well, leave the group. It's up to you. It's up to you. So parents and children, big one. Very big one. Romantic partners, also very big one. Heavily enmeshed relationships right there. You always consider yourself a we. And it's normalized in our culture throughout the world to be a we when you have a partner. But at the end of the day, you're not. You're not a we. You're two me's connecting. Always remind yourself of that. And then in families, in groups, and this can also, and also friends. So in the pattern is, the closer and the more intense a relationship is, so romantic partners, certain familial ties, best friends, close friendships, the closer you get to somebody, the more intense that relationship is, likely the more enmeshed you're going to become. So you need to remember and be aware of that. Because if you have somebody who's just like, oh yeah, no, they're just like a friend, they're like an acquaintance, you're likely not going to be enmeshed with that person. You don't expect much out of that person, right? And likewise, same to you. So there's not going to be enmeshment. So the more intense, likely the more enmeshed. So be aware of that. Okay. And as I was saying, it's all we and no me in romantic relationships that are enmeshed. So be aware of that tendency. And when you get to these extremes, they often do not have independent friendships outside of the relationship. Either friend is our friend, not their friend. Or you can see this pattern. You might have a friend, or you might do this yourself sometimes too, where since you're enmeshed in a romantic relationship, whenever somebody invites one of the partners to hang out, it's like they're always a pair. It's like, oh yeah, they're coming. It's just a given. It's like, oh no, my friend reaches out and, you invite them to go do something and they always show up together. That is enmeshed. That is unhealthy. You need time apart, you need individual friendships and connections outside of that relationship. You need to start unenmeshing yourself if this is the case. And if your partner or part of the relationship gets upset that you want to individuate, that you want some time away, that you want a weekend with just your friends, if you want to, instead of you always do this thing together, actually you want to go do it by yourself, that is healthy. Put up those boundaries, assert those boundaries. And even if you're comfortable in an enmeshed relationship, I'm telling you right now, it's not healthy and you're going to run into problems. So it's best to, even though it's working right now, to start becoming a little bit more independent. Because what happens if that relationship ends suddenly? Well, you're high and dry. You're all alone. You have to start from scratch. You might have lost a lot of friends. You might not have a healthy group or community that you're a part of. You might have let go of your hobbies because you only do things that you do together. So it's important to keep that healthy independence, to become a me from the we. And this is big thing. So you will likely feel like you have to emotionally regulate your partner. And likewise, they might feel the same for you if you're in an enmeshed relationship. And that's not the case. You are not responsible for the other person's emotional feelings all the time and emotionally regulating them all the time. Obviously, it's good to support and it's good to be there for the person, but there are going to be, you also need to take care of yourself and take care of your life and handle your responsibilities. You can't be constantly doing this all the time, and you can't be holding on to that guilt and holding on to the I need to take care of this person all the time, especially empaths. You're not going to be able to take care of them, and likely you're not going to be able to pull them out of those negative emotional states all the time, if ever. That weight is primarily on them. They need to do the work, or they might need to just go through that state and let it clear out of their system. There's many different facets to this. And you need to be able to relax. If your partner isn't feeling great, you need to be able to at least have brief moments where you're like, it's okay. This is on them. This is my weight to bear. I'm going to do my best to support them as a me and connect with them as a me, not a we. Instead of only feeling bad and negative when they feel bad. And if you can't get rid of that, and if you can't get that out of your system, it's time to start unenmeshing yourself. It's time to start putting up those boundaries. And knowing that that weight isn't yours to bear. And this ties into families a lot, right? You have families that they do everything together all the time. There's no separation. They have their traditions, they have the values, and as soon as you deviate from that norm, you're a bad kid. You don't do that. We don't do that. What are you doing? We do this. If you're a part of a dynamic like that, you're likely coming from an unhealthily enmeshed family. And this is very normal. Same thing with enmeshed relationships. So it's good to be good to be aware of this. And you need to realize that you are an individual, a part of that group. You are allowed to be, and you should be an individual, a part of that group. And you need to assert your boundaries. And you need to, keep your individuality a part of that. It's good to compromise when that's healthy, but ultimately it's up to you to decide how you want to do that, and if you want to be a part of certain dynamics, and if you want to do certain things. It's up to you. It's your life. Always remember that, empaths. Instead of just going down the normal pattern of just putting your needs to the wayside for the other person or for that group. You don't want to lose yourself, because many of you have this tendency to continuously lose yourself in groups and families and relationships. So just remember that. All right. And what to do if you're in one. So you want to change that dynamic. You want to know that it's possible. And know at the bare minimum that you can unenmesh yourself and then renegotiate and find out whether or not you're truly deeply compatible with that person and or that group. This is important. This is the healthiest decision, even though it's uncomfortable, even though it's not necessarily fun. And know that it's not going to be easy. You're going to have to consistently put in consistent quality work over the long term. Remember that. But it's worth it and it will pay off. Always remember that. And it's good to just recognize and, at times label, yeah, we're enmeshed. We have an enmeshed relationship, or this group dynamic is enmeshed. How do we go about unenmeshing ourselves in a healthy manner? And where do we start? So you start first. You start small. Do something small. At one point later in the article, they talk about, you might always eat out together. You always might get the same takeout from the same restaurant. Perhaps it's important to be like, if you are not feeling that type of cuisine that your partner's feeling, be like, oh yeah, I'm going to get Mexican tonight. You can get Italian and we can eat together. That's a good thing to start. And start small. Start small and then work your way into those bigger, more difficult enmeshment patterns. Or start where there's the most friction in that relationship, where it causes the biggest trouble, and that you'll begin to break down and unenmesh from maybe like the linchpin in the relationship that is hinging on whether or not this relationship is going to work or not. So start small at first and get used to the process, perhaps, or start chipping away at those more serious enmeshed patterns. And try to set these boundaries in a calm, collected manner if you can. Not easy all the time. We're very emotional beings, but we should always try to be calm and try to communicate clearly and effectively, no matter what you have to say, even if it's going to hurt your partner. And if you have a hard time verbalizing this, write it down, make some notes, and bring that to the conversation so you get to communicate exactly what you want to say. And then in the future, you might not need those notes because you got used to communicating. And once again, be prepared for pushback. So when you try to unenmesh yourself from a relationship, particularly empaths that are going to, at some point in time in your life, going to be in a lopsided relationship where you lose yourself in the other person's needs and their needs come first consistently over time, they're not going to like it. Why? Because they don't get what they want. It's best for them in the long term. They should be a part of a healthy dynamic, but they're not going to like it because they want their needs met. And that's okay. Be aware of that. Be aware that it might be a little messy. Be aware that you might get some pushback. Be aware that you might be guilt tripped. This is all a part of the process. But stick to your guns. This is why it's important to write it down and take that time away to really find out what you need and desire in a relationship. And if it gets to that point where they push back so hard or it's so difficult, well, guess what? And you finally individuate, you finally unenmesh yourself. Well, then you realize, well, we're actually not deeply compatible then, because this is who I am. This is what I want and desire in a relationship. And it's not aligned with the person. That is great. Then your next relationship, you make space for it, and you're going to connect with somebody that you connect a little bit more with, that you have a healthier dynamic with, that you don't just automatically enmesh with. So it's all about the long term. It's all about long-term growth, even though in the short term it might be very uncomfortable. Remember that. Obviously, therapy, reaching out to a therapist, is also a good thing. Relationship therapy, marriage counseling, whatever it could be. So that's just a quick little gloss over. Once again, I'm going to link this in the description. But empaths, I thought this was very important for many of you to dissect and to dig into about being a part of enmeshed relationships, because many of people in my life that I observe, highly empathic people, especially from what this article is saying, are going to enmesh themselves with others where they put their needs they put the other person's needs before their needs, and then they lose themselves in that relationship. So wherever you're at in your relationships, it might be important to take some time. What relationships am I enmeshed in? Which relationships do I consistently put my needs to the wayside? And also, what aspects of myself and my relationships that might be a little healthier, might be a little balanced, where I might be acting out in an entitled manner, where I might not be allowing the other person to assert their boundaries. Also important to call ourselves out. But I'm going to leave it here. I hope this was helpful. And I hope you're having a lovely day wherever you're at in the world. And until next time.